Next up is Mike Rogie. Mike is a colleague of ours down in Adams County. And he's a small farms educator down there, 28, 30 years, something like that. And Mike and Teresa are both commercial growers. They've got, 3 high tunnels now? 2 high tunnels, and they do Madrid Rose strawberries, and they do pumpkins, and they have an agritainment business there on the farm. It's a U-pick pumpkin, right? That's right, okay. And you've been doing pumpkins how long?
1991.
Okay, so Mike's got a lot of practical experience in the field growing pumpkins, and does a really good job with it. Glad to have him up here, and so we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kyle. Well, good morning, everybody. Like Kyle said, we've been raising pumpkins since 1991. The biggest problem we have, and Nathan's going to address this a little bit later on here, is weed control. If you're growing pumpkins before, you know you'll be using a hoe out there trying to control the weeds because there's not a whole lot of herbicides to use. So, 23 years of raising pumpkins, we've seen, and pardon the Clint Eastwood cliche here, we've seen the good years, the bad years, and the ugly years. So we're going to talk about some of that today here in the next hour or so, how to avoid some of those bad and ugly times, okay? But you're not going to avoid them altogether. You're probably going to have them at some point in time. Some facts about pumpkins, and I didn't realize this. You don't realize it either, but behind Christmas, Halloween is a holiday where the Americans spend the second most amount of money on the U.S. That, to me, is amazing. How we've gone. We started raising pumpkins in '91. You know, there wasn't nearly the amount of pumpkins raised back then than there is today. It's an event today. Going to the pumpkin patch with your family is huge. Entertainment, agritourism is just huge. It's very, very popular. Again, Americans spend the second highest amount of income on a holiday for Halloween than any other holiday in the U.S. It's something to consider. So if you haven't grown pumpkins, you're looking for some opportunities, I think it's there. We do have a pick your own. That's how most people do it. School tours are very popular, especially now that they're trying to get more hands-on experiences for kids. It's become very popular to have a pumpkin patch for kids. Provide a little bit of education. My wife does that. She gives about a half-hour program to the kids. She talks about pollination. Rick talked about the bees and pollination. Talks about how to plant a pumpkin, what you do when you get a seed to germinate, those types of things to try to get an interactive thing with the kids and get them to learn something as well. And they get to pick a pumpkin, take a hayride. It's a good thing to do. And Illinois actually raises more acres of pumpkins than any other state in the nation. A lot of that's due to Morton, Illinois, and Libby's. Probably half. I think Mohammed Babadous, our plant pathologist, has said Illinois raises around 25,000 acres of pumpkins, which seems like a lot, but when you compare it to 12 million acres of corn, it's not a whole lot, But about half the pumpkins we raise in Illinois are for processing. So it is a popular crop in Illinois. So in the next 50 minutes or whatever, we're going to talk about several things. Looking at your site and soil and nutrition for pumpkins, different types of planting options. How are you going to plant your pumpkins? What about varieties? There's buku varieties of pumpkins out there. And yeah, we look in the picture here, you see a lot of orange pumpkins on display there. But there are blue pumpkins, there's white pumpkins, there are green pumpkins, there are yellow pumpkins, all types of different pumpkins out there. So you want to try to vary your pumpkin varieties for your clientele. And pest control. Rick talked about the insects. Nathan's going to talk about the weeds. So we'll talk a little bit about diseases here today as well. Okay, let's look at a site on where we plant pumpkins. Like any other crop, pumpkins does not tolerate wet soils. In fact, if you look at major production areas of pumpkin in Illinois, a lot of them are very well-drained soils. Beardstown, which you folks in this room may be familiar with where Beardstown is, it's a very sandy area. It raises quite a few pumpkins there. They don't like wet feet. And we looked at when you plant pumpkins, which is usually the first part of June, think about what the first part of June was like this year. It rained about every 3 days. In 2012, it wasn't a problem getting pumpkins planted timely. As a matter of fact, just the opposite occurred. We need to provide water to them. 2011 was a lot like 2013, very, very wet in the spring of the year. Again, pumpkins don't do well in wet soil, so if we do get these extreme weather conditions, which it seems like we're seeing more and more predominant weather conditions like that, look at your soil type. The better drained it is, the better pumpkins are going to do. Question was, you had a choice between level, black, flat, bottom land, high organic matter, poor drainage or good drainage?
Normal.
Well, there's gumbo that doesn't drain very well, and there's good black there too.
Well drained.
Okay, well drained. Versus a soil on a clay hillside, maybe somewhat eroded.
Yeah.
Probably won't matter. But the thing I would be concerned about is in a little area like that, this would be frost injury. You know, can you get your pumpkins out there early enough before you get major frost injury? And the further north you go, the more concern that is. Down south, it's probably not a concern. But if you've got good drained soil, that's all you need. If you've got gumbo soils and bottoms, that's probably not good for pumpkin production.
What I guess I'm getting at is like the row crops won't do well on the hillside.
The row crops won't do good on the hillside.
But we'll
Pumpkins grow in sand, okay? You got to provide supplemental water sometimes in sand, but pumpkins will grow on pretty crappy ground. Adequate soil fertility, like any other crop, you got to feed it. You can't expect a crop to survive and thrive if you don't feed it. So we'll talk about fertility here as well. Some slope is preferred. We talked about that to answer your question. If we get an extremely cold October, we're expecting some frost. On immature pumpkins, that's a problem. Immature pumpkins will not take a frost without it damaging the skin. A mature pumpkin will take temperatures down to the low 20s before you're going to damage it, okay? So depending upon your location, especially under calm conditions, the cold is going to settle to a low area. So if you have concern with getting pumpkins off in a low area in a cold night, that may be problematic. So look at that when you make your decision on where to plant your pumpkins. Rick talked about a little bit about crop rotations, but for diseases, that's essential. We can't keep planting pumpkins or any other cucurbit crop, cucumbers, cantaloupe, watermelons in the same spot every year. You want at least a 3-year rotation. The longer you go, the more possibility there is for that disease to break down and die before you plant that cucurbit crop back in that same location. So look at rotation. It's essential to do that. And then lastly, water availability. Wasn't a problem in 2011. 2012, remember last year, they quit raining July 1st, right? I had 2 inches of rain from July 1st to the middle of October in 2012. Where we had pumpkins growing at our house, we provided supplemental. We trickle irrigated. We trickle irrigation, and they survived it rather well. We rent some ground we grow pumpkins on as well, and until we got Hurricane Isaac that came through on Labor Day a year ago, our pumpkins were about 6 foot long. I mean, you could walk the whole field and not step on any vines, and that's not what you want to see into August. That doesn't equate to a very good yield. We did not have that food to put supplemental water on there, and our yields suffered terribly because of that. Now, come October 30th, we had some 50-pound pumpkins out there. When Isaac came through, we got 4 inches of rain. That really allowed those pumpkins to thrive. But you can't sell too many pumpkins November 1st, okay? It don't do any good to have pumpkins this big November 1st because you can't sell them. So if you need supplemental water, and again, we're looking at changing of environments here and weather patterns. We're seeing some erratic weather here, so be cautious about where you plant these pumpkins because you may need supplemental water. Soil test is essential. You start with a soil test. This is just basic agronomy here. Every 3 to 5 years, take a soil test. Go 7 inches deep in the soil. Take a probe or take a slice with your shovel. 4 or 5 acres per sample. Take 4 or 5 samples within those 4 or 5 acres. Combine them all together. Make a soil sample and take it to these FS, whoever do your business with. pH is important. We like to see a pH between 6.2 and 6.5. You see the chart on the right-hand side there. I kind of outlined where 6.2 to 6.5 is to show you why it's so important. pH affects the availability of nutrients to the plant. You see how wide those bars are for the different nutrients. The wider the bar, the more the availability. Between those 2 red lines, that's where the highest availability is, at 6.2 to 6.5. Make sure your soil pH stays within those ranges to make the nutrients available to your plant. Nitrogen recommendations depend upon organic matter, okay? The higher the organic matter, the darker the soil, the more nitrogen is going to mineralize or be available through nature to the crop. So it means the less you have to provide to it. So the darker the soil, the higher the organic matter, the less nitrogen. Because you put too much nitrogen on a pumpkin crop, you get all vine. You don't want all vine. Vines are good, but vines are necessary for photosynthesis. But you don't want all vine. You want some fruit out there as well. So be cautious about over-fertilization of nitrogen. And these are rough guidelines. You know, this isn't cast in concrete, but when you do your soil test, make sure you get organic matter on that soil test. If your organic matter is less than 2%, which is somewhat low, you can up your nitrogen to about 100 to 120 pounds per acre. That's actual nitrogen. You don't want to go above that, again, because you've got to be cautious about over-fertilizing with nitrogen. These higher organic matter soils, greater than 2%, you cut back on your nitrogen to 60 pounds or so, okay? And you can split apply that if you want to. Some people do. We don't. We put it all on at planting, right before planting. But if you want to, you can split apply it. Better utilization, perhaps. A caution, though. Look at your nitrogen source. Urea is a dry fertilizer. That's what we use for nitrogen fertilizer. You got to be cautious when you apply urea, though, in summer with warm temperatures, and especially if you don't, unless you incorporate it. Now we no-till our pumpkins into rye, so we don't incorporate. So you have to be cautious about losing that nitrogen if you put that urea on the soil surface without incorporation. There are products you can use to treat that urea with to prevent volatilization. There are urease inhibitors. Agrotane is one of them, for instance, that we can use to put on your urea to prevent loss of nitrogen. So unless you're incorporating your urea, you may want to consider putting your nitrogen on right before you see a black cloud to the west coming through to help the rainfall incorporate it, or treating it with a product to prevent loss of nitrogen. And remember, when you put your phosphorus on, you're probably going to use DAP, diammonium phosphate. That's the highest phosphorus analysis. It also contains 18% nitrogen. So take that into account to determine how many total pounds of nitrogen can be used.
Hey, Mike, just real quickly, talk about what the runner formation, what that means.
Okay, the question was talk about runner formation. You plant a plant. You got a single plant. You know, you got your cotyledon comes up, and you get your leaves come off of it, and then runners start forming off those plants, right? And that's where your leaves are going to form off that run. You probably get 3 or 4 or 5 runners off a single plant. You know, the plant's going to spread out. Okay. Oftentimes, you put your nitrogen on there before the runners form. Then when you get your tractor and the spreader through there without damaging the vines. So the vines are the runners. You can use this to determine how much potash you want to apply to your field based upon your soil test. In other words, if you have a soil test that reads on the left-hand side there, 240 pounds per acre. You took your soil to the fertility guy, you got it back, it says your soil test at your potassium test at 240 pounds per acre. For pumpkins, you want about 110 pounds of K2O, which would equal, if you're applying potash, 0060 potash you get from the FS or whoever, you're going to be needing about 180 pounds of 0060. So we've done the calculations for you, okay? So if you get this, you want to be looking at determining how much fertilizer you put on. Use this as a guide. Same thing for the phosphorus here. And we look at, while we talked about maybe you want to supplement or split apply your nitrogen, the reason is because the crop doesn't use it when it's 6 inches tall, does it? There's not much of a plant there. You have all the fertilizer front loaded on that plant. It's not going to utilize it till it's probably 2 months old. Okay? So that's why we talk about split applying it so you don't lose it. If you get heavy rainfall between when you applied it and say the 1st of August, when it's really going to start utilizing that nitrogen, that's why you may want to split apply the nitrogen to prevent that loss from occurring, because the plant's not going to use it until much later in life. So planting date, when do you plant your pumpkins? Pumpkin maturities range tremendously from approximately 90 days from planting to 120 days. Depends on the pumpkin. The great big pumpkins, the 100-pounders and plus 100-pounders, going to take 120 days from planting roughly to maturity. So those have to be planted much earlier, maybe a month earlier than your small jack-o'-lanterns do. So do you plant them all at once? Probably not. you're looking at scatter planting, okay? You're looking at different fields for planting. But time your planting based upon when you start to market your pumpkins, and you just go back on the counter from there. We always try to plant our big pumpkins around the 25th of May or so. I live in Quincy, Illinois, which is central Illinois. We try to plant our big pumpkins the 25th or so of May. And our jack-o'-lanterns, the 90 to 95 day ones, we try to plant around the 8th or so of June. We know and again, that means they're going to be maturing sometime the 2nd to 3rd week of September. They're not all going to turn at once. It's going to take some time because pumpkins put on blossoms throughout their entire life, right? This is going to be the first harvest at these dates. They're going to be continuing to produce until you get a frost that kills that plant. So look at when you time your first planting to when you think you need to be in the market. When we first started planting pumpkins, you didn't worry about it until October 1st. Anymore, you go to the grocery store, it looks like they have pumpkins out there July 4th almost. Some places are selling pumpkins at Labor Day now. They've really changed in the last 20 years as far as marketing. So look at what your market is. We need to have pumpkins to that market and make your planting date determination after that. What are your planting options? I mean, there's a lot of planting options for pumpkins. Rick talked about direct seeding. It's the most popular, which it is. But direct seeding is not the only option. Direct seeding means you plant the seed directly into the soil. All right. There's options for transplanting. And Nathan down in Southern Illinois, Johanning, Kyle, Cecil, Nathan Johanning, and I are all on the same local food small farms team. Okay, we're all co-workers. Nathan, he transplants his pumpkins. Now, transplanting has certain benefits. Some people prefer transplanting to direct seeding. We'll talk about some of the reasons why you may want to do that here fairly soon. But look at your planting options. You got all kinds of options. If you're planting bare soil, very popular. You use a plastic mulch. I know growers, not very many, but some growers use plastic mulch with a trickle irrigation tube underneath it, plant their pumpkins directly on that black plastic mulch. Now, why would they do that? Weed control, right? Weed control. You know, if that plastic mulch is 3 foot wide, you're going to be weed free those 3 feet right there. So it can be burdensome to control weeds. We talked about that. Plastic mulch offers opportunities to control those weeds. Plus, if you want to supplement and irrigate, you've got the system in place to do that with that trickle irrigation line. Questions about black plastic mulch, and I've got some pictures to show what that is here pretty shortly, okay? But we'll talk about that here pretty soon. You can plant in a cover crop. For the last 6 years, we've planted our pumpkins no-till into a cereal rye or a veg cover crop. It's again, for weed control purposes, that's why we do it. You can plant by hand or you can use a machine. We do both. We try to get it done by machine, but because of the weather conditions the last couple of years, we plant about 5 or 6 acres of pumpkins every year. I bet in this year, in 13, and again in 11, because it's so wet, half of those were planted by hand with a hoe. My wife, Kyle, does.
Good person.
It's a good person, that's right. You try to do things easy with a machine, with a planter, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes Mother Nature sees differently than what you do. So you have to be prepared. But either one will work. No-till versus conventional, direct seed versus transplant. Again, there's reasons to do these. Depends upon the situation you have and how you see things working into your operation.
Right.
The question was, how do pumpkins rotate with field corn or soybeans? That's what we do. We actually, our rotation is either corn, soybeans, or sweet corn with pumpkins. You'll get some volunteer, you're never going to be 100% picked out on pumpkins. It's hard to do that. You're always going to have some pumpkins that are green or rot or whatever. So you got to be cautious about the volunteer pumpkins. And you will get volunteer pumpkins. No matter what you plant the next year, you get volunteer pumpkins. If you plant field corn after pumpkins, use 2.5 quarts of Bicep or whatever you want to use for your corn herbicide, you're still going to get volunteer pumpkins coming through that. Pumpkins are a very resilient crop. They really are. Rick talked about, using weed control, Roundup weed control in field corn. It's hard to kill pumpkins with Roundup even. I mean, you don't want to spray 22 ounces of Roundup on a pumpkin field, okay? You don't want to do that. But we use in a small hand sprayer to try to kill weeds in between the pumpkins. I'll use Roundup sometimes or Gramoxone, Liberty at other times. And we'll get a little bit of splash on one leaf of Roundup. And we didn't cover the whole plant, just one little leaf covered. It'll have an effect for a short amount of time, but it won't kill that plant. Pumpkins are very resilient, so be prepared for volunteer pumpkin problems in the crop you plant after your pumpkins, because you're going to have them.
What do they do to the soil for the soil? Do they, like, soybeans put the nitrogen back, do the pumpkins take it out, or no difference?
The question was, what do pumpkins do for soil fertility? And soybeans don't actually put nitrogen back. Soybeans take out more nitrogen than what they contribute. The thing is, because it has less residue, it doesn't take as much microbial degradation, doesn't take as much nitrogen from the soil microbes. So it's a misnomer that soybeans are a legume. They don't provide nitrogen. They actually take more nitrogen out. Pumpkins are not a legume, so they're not going to really treat anything any different than the corn crop would. They are going to remove fertility, and I had a slide here showing that earlier. I kind of skipped it, but they will take fertility out of the field. Planting options in bare soil is the most common. It's the most easiest. But the reason we use no-till and dry is because weed control is more difficult in bare soil. And Nathan's going to talk about that here a little later. Plastic mulch is another option. You can see this picture here of actually a zucchini plant. You notice that or not. And it's got red plastic mulch underneath it. But plastic mulch, again, you put that drip irrigation underneath there, and I got a picture to show you. Hold on. You set plants are direct seeded, but it's weed competition. To reduce that weed competition is why black plastic mulch or red plastic mulch or green plastic mulch, or you want to do, works. Okay.
Like, don't you think that's going to be the trend? I mean, the people that are going to be consistently serious about growing commercial ornamental pumpkins are going to go towards a drip irrigation black plastic mulch system.
And the question Kyle asked, do you think that's going to be kind of a trend in the future here, looking at black plastic and trickle irrigation? Yes and no. I mean, it works, but it's a pain too. You got to pick all that plastic up at the end of the season. Trying to pick up black plastic when you got dead vines laying over it is not easy. It's not easy to pick up that black plastic, and you got to recycle it or burn it, and that's not good for the environment either. So there's pluses and minuses for every system. And black plastic is the same thing. There's pluses and minuses for it.
Hey, Mike, I'll add something on that, and this is more kind of a regional issue. Is that down here we've actually found that in some cases the pumpkins can get too hot in the summer on black plastic. So we really, I mean, there are some people that maybe if they have black plastic out, but I don't really think that down here that's as optimal. Now, obviously, further north, if you have cooler temperatures, that might be an issue. But I would agree with you that, you know, small scale maybe, but on large scale, irrigation is good, but I don't know if the black plastic, due to all the things you mentioned, is necessarily going to, you know, be viable in larger areas.
It's a good point, Nathan. And many growers, if they're looking at plastic, it's not going to be black, it's going to be white. You have plastic called white on black on one side, white on the other, and use the white side to reduce the heat like Nathan's talking about, because it can get pretty warm with that black plastic. You don't have it shaded real well in July when it's 100 degrees out. Here's some options from simple to complex. Lower left-hand corner there. Everybody knows how to use one of those, don't they? The truck. No. The hoe is what I'm talking about. The upper right-hand corner, that's just a John Deere 7000 box for no-tilling pumpkins into direct seed pumpkins. In the lower right-hand corner, everybody probably has one of these too, don't they? An earthway seeder. That's not a bad apparatus to use for planting pumpkins on the smaller acreage. It works. So look at whatever works in your situation. Again, we've planted acres every year with a hoe. Not by choice, but it can be done. Okay, it's not that difficult.
You'll fill in gaps and everything, so you will plant some with a hoe.
Yeah, you will. Machine planting. You can make your own. We used to use a plate planter. And we had like a John Deere 95 or something like that, a plate planter. Make your own plates. You know, you take I'll show you a picture. Take seed corn plates and cut out holes for the larger pumpkin seed. Or you can use a finger pickup. We use a John Deere 7000 now with a finger pickup, and that works really well. And I'll show you a picture of that as well. Here's the planter plates modified. I just fill in the corn slots with auto body putty or whatever, and then you can see the green plate on the right-hand side there. Just take a file and open those seed corn slots up big enough to fit a pumpkin. Pumpkin seeds are probably 3 times bigger than seed corn is, so you got to have larger openings for those seeds. The only problem with the plate planter is between where the plate rests on the planter mechanism, there's a little gap there, and those pumpkin seeds are flat enough to fit in that gap, and you lose a lot of seeds that way. You crush a lot of seeds doing that. Now, seed corn and soybeans, when we use these for corn and beans, wasn't a problem because they're rounder. They would fit in that gap. But these pumpkin seeds, because they're so flat, fit in that gap, and it can cause, it chews them up is what it does. But again, it's so much easier to use a planter than a hoe when you're trying to plant. Well, at that time we had this planter, we planted 12, 15 acres of pumpkins every year. And you can't do that with a hoe. You got to have something else to work with. So we're using the planter plate for that. But since we've gone to a 7,000 planter now, we just took out the meter mechanism off of that lower left-hand corner there. You can see the meter mechanism for corn or beans. Took the plate off, and what you see, yeah, there we go. You see what Kyle's pointing to there. That's the finger on the end of that finger pickup. You take each of those fingers off of there. You cut them all off but 2 of them, okay? Because you don't need a whole. A corn planter plants 30,000 seeds per acre. You don't want that for pumpkins, okay? That's a little overpopulation right there. So you take off all but 2 of the fingers, grind them off. You take those fingers and grind them out to about 1/3 of the original size. Those fingers are about 1 inch long normally. They're about 3/8 of an inch long in this photo here, okay? And then there's a pretty good.
Yeah, I am.
And then there's a cam. Point right here, if you could, Kyle. There's a cam where these fingers slide on. Because those fingers open up and close, you got to grind that cam down so the finger doesn't come up as much either. But it's not that hard to do. It sure makes planting easier. We got a 4-row 7,000 to plant 2 rows at a time. It makes it really easy. Thank you, Kyle. That's planting seed. Transplanting is also something you can be looking at, but seed is quicker. The problem we have, and again, we use no-till in the cereal rye or hairy vetch, is these darn voles. Now, if you guys have them in your gardens or not, but they are just a menace, and they love cover. Especially hairy vetch is even worse than what cereal rye is. They love cover. They're vegetarians. They eat seed. Okay, they're not moles with an M. Are carnivores, right? They eat worms and grubs. Voles with a V are herbaceous. They eat seeds. They'll open those seeds up and consume the internal part of that seed, which becomes a real problem when you're trying to plant pumpkins second week of June and you've already planted them once or twice because the voles got in there. Transplanting those plants avoids the vole problems. So that's a critical thing that transplanting does. You avoid those vole problems, okay? Plus, if you transplant, you don't have to plant June the 8th. Because you transplant this plant, it's already 2 weeks old and you transplant it. So if you're trying to save time, if you wanted to plant after a certain crop comes out in your garden, say you've got your peas or whatever, first crop of peas comes out, like the 15th or 20th of June. Well, if you want to put pumpkin in there, you might be a little bit late with a larger maturity pumpkin, but if you put a transplant out there, you save 2 weeks' time. So it might offer you opportunities to look at your soil and utilize it to a fuller extent. Transplants allow you to do that. A friend of mine has problems with killdeer digging up the seed as well. They're just as bad as the voles on his place. Again, transplants avoid that problem. Lower right-hand corner, there's that black plastic mulch I was talking about. This is a mulch layer on the lower right-hand corner. Black plastic mulch, and this is the white on black we were talking about. He's got the black on the white. You see the white right here? That's what he's going to plant his pumpkins on. what you do is the black plastic comes out this way. These wheels right here hold it down. You have discs right behind it right here that throw soil into that. So you have a roll of black plastic. This is 3-foot white plastic. You'll bury about 4 inches on each side in soil to hold it. So you'll have about 2.5 foot of plastic that you can put a plant on. He plants pumpkins, squash, zucchinis, his cold crops on white plastic. So he does this much. Underneath there, there'll be a trickle line. On the lower left-hand side there, that's a water wheel planter that Kyle's pointing to. It's a transplanter as well. You can take that down this plastic line here. There's a wheel right here that pokes holes in the ground. You can get various size. There you go. You can see these little things that poke right here where it pokes into the soil. These are holes. These are divots. There's 2 seats back here where people can sit placing plants in that hole right there. Okay, that's a water wheel transplanter. As you're planting, there's also ability to provide water. You see the water tanks up here. Puts the water to that transplant hole to kind of give it a head start. Now Nathan uses a mechanical transplanter. I don't have a picture of it here, but he uses it in his no-till pumpkin planting and for wheat stubbles. But this water wheel transplanter we showed you would not work in a no-till situation. It's got to work in a cultivated situation. Spacing requirements, again, it depends on the size of your pumpkin. The larger the pumpkin is, the more space it needs to grow. It's going to utilize those resources, those fertility resources you provided to it. So if you've got the top line, if you've got a very large pumpkin, a 100-pound pumpkin, let's say, you've got to give it more room to grow. You need 50 to 60 square foot per plant in that case. It just needs room to grow to be able to put on those large pumpkins and grow them out to size. On the opposite of that, if you've got a small pie pumpkin, 5 or 6 pound pumpkin, let's say, you don't need nearly the space because the pumpkin itself isn't that big, okay? So it depends upon the size of the pumpkin, how much space you have to give it. But take that into account as you're planting them. When we use our planter, that 7,000, it's the first and the third row, so we've got 5 foot between them. Okay, we're on 30 inches, so 60 inches would be 5 foot between them. We try to space them out in that 5 foot, depending upon what they are, between 4, 6, or 8 feet in the row. Okay, again, look at this width you're going to go, determine how many square foot you need, and take the length, divide it out, and you get the length of how you want to plant your pumpkins. And we always try to overplant, because we can go back through the hoe and thin them out if we need to. So take advantage of the opportunities you have when you plant to maybe plant a little bit higher than normal, thin them out if you need to. It's better to do it just once than plant twice. Varieties of pumpkins, we talked about the orange pumpkin, which is everybody's ideal pumpkin, but today consumers want everything. They just don't want an orange pumpkin. The flat stackables, those sell like you wouldn't believe. You can put about whatever price you want on them. The flat ones that stack up 3 or 4 different sizes and colors, those sell really well. In the pictures here I'm showing, you don't see any orange pumpkins there, do you? They're all different sizes and varieties. People want a variety today. Give people what they want. The little 6 or 8 pound white pumpkins sold like crazy this year. We couldn't keep them. I mean, we couldn't keep enough of them. They just sold that rapidly. But you want varieties, which is what I'm saying, okay? You want variety. Just don't grow the orange ones. You'll sell them. You'll sell a lot more of the orange ones. You have the blue ones, the yellow ones, the white ones, and the green ones as well.
That's a good point. I want to emphasize that too, is that everybody in the world, like up here for the Murfreesboro group, we have a thing in the fall. It's Scenic Drive where everyone drives around. Well, what's the first thing you see on Scenic Drive? There's 1,000 places that are selling an orange pumpkin. So if you're, wanting to be in this commercial and make a living doing it, everybody grows pumpkins in their backyard, and everybody that time of year will have those orange pumpkins for sale. So you've really got to have something different to grow out there.
So look for variety and know your customer base. It changes. The stacked pumpkins the last couple of years have been very, very hot sellers. We kind of talked about this. One thing I will emphasize on your jack-o'-lanterns, your orange pumpkins especially, we always look for disease resistance or disease tolerance, because you're going to get diseases whether you want them or not. Powdery mildew, we'll talk about it shortly here, is a menace to pumpkin growers. You get it every year. There are pumpkin varieties now that have certain tolerances to powdery mildew. We always choose a resistant or tolerant variety if we can. It just makes it, and again, they're not resistant. You're going to get them. You have to spray them anyway, but you don't have to spray nearly as often. And they have them out there, and they're good looking pumpkins. Yeah.
Are these newer ones less disease resistant? All these new varieties?
Or what?
Are they less disease resistant?
No, the newer varieties are the resistant ones.
So?
When we started growing pumpkins, Howden was a variety Big planted. Howden was it. Howden has no disease resistance whatsoever, but it's probably grown on 90% of the acreages back in the early 90s. Everybody grew it because it worked. We didn't have the diseases back then. But because everybody's growing pumpkins today, there's so much more pumpkins grown, which allows these diseases to progress and accumulate. So it's much more important today than it was 25 years ago to control diseases. So if you can, on these jack-o'-lanterns, get the resistant varieties. That's what my suggestion is. There's, again, we'll go through these pretty quick, but there's all different sizes and shapes.
Mike, Nathan, you might remember this too. We have a pathologist, Mike has mentioned him, Dr. Mohammed Babadous. If you want to write that down, Babadous, B-A-B-B-A-D-O-O-S-T. I would venture to say he's one of the worldwide. He's probably the worldwide expert on diseases in pumpkins, and we have him here in Illinois.
Plenty of seed sources too. Okay, don't worry about finding seeds. Everybody and his dog's got them. Again, this is real quick on varieties. I'm not going to tell you what variety to grow. I'm just going to say if you look for variety, size, shape, color, maturity, and disease resistance, you can get it. Pollination is important. Rick talked about it earlier. You need bees. That's why Rick spent the last 5-10 minutes talking about protecting bees. You got to have bees, all right? Honeybees are utilized more than any other bee, but remember, honeybee is not native to North America. Pumpkin is. So how did pumpkin survive before honeybees were here? There are native bees that pollinate pumpkins, so do what you can to encourage those native pollinators, okay? But oftentimes you're going to need honeybees to provide supplemental pollination. On pumpkins and gourds, you'll have both male flowers and female flowers on the same vine.
Okay, so
the male flowers are attached to a long petiole, okay? There's a petiole between the flower and the stem, probably 6 or 8 inches long. The females are attached directly to the stem. And you're going to have different reproductive organisms in both the flowers. It's easy to recognize a male and a female plant flower on pumpkins and gourds and so forth. They're going to be different in their reproductive capacity. You have a petiole on the males versus no petiole on the females.
And that's on pumpkins.
Pumpkins and gourds.
Now, gourds have the staminate and the fistulate. The female has the fistulate and the male has the staminate.
2 different flowers, though.
2 different flowers, right,
Right.
male and female on the vine.
Right.
Are the pumpkins the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. And male blossoms will come up before female blossoms do, probably 3 or 4 days earlier. Okay? And the reason Rick was so worried, and you should be worried about bees and using the insecticides on pumpkins, is because those pumpkin flowers are open, they open at daybreak. Depending how warm it is and how stressed they are from lack of water or not, they're closed by noon, maybe 2 o'clock, and that's it. They open once and they're done, right? When you are spraying, if you're not organic, when you're spraying an insecticide, never, ever spray when bees are out there. But Rick didn't tell you when to spray. Spray in the evening at dusk, okay? Evening at dusk, when the flowers are closed up. You will not harm a bee that way because there's no flowers to you're not going to get insecticide on the flower. So always spray at dusk, fungicide and insecticide.
Do you know, you were talking about the native bees. What would they be?
There are a lot of solitary bees. The question was, what about native bees? They're solitary ground bees for the most part. You'll find them amongst pumpkin patches. They're individuals. They're not colonies like honeybees are. They're ground-dwelling bees. There's probably half a dozen different types of native bees.
But they don't colonize.
They don't colonize, no. And beetles. We talked about the cucumber beetles and the western corn rootworm beetles. They will pollinate to some degree. So I don't get overly excited about killing cucumber beetles or western corn rootworm beetles once I see a high population, because they're going to pollinate as well. So I allow them out there for a little while. The more visits you get on a blossom, a female blossom, the bigger and better shape the pumpkin's going to be. You'll get weird-looking pumpkins. Maybe they're not developed on one side. We didn't get enough visits, enough pollen, enough visits by honeybees to allow that seed to, not enough seed in that pumpkin, all right? So you had a misshapen pumpkin because of that. The more visits you get, the more healthier that fruit is. It's going to result in a better, and the more healthier that blossom is going to result into a better fruit. Okay, moving ahead here. You will have pest problems. Again, powdery mildew to me is the biggest disease problem issue we have. Spray equipment. Rick talked about a backpack sprayer. I'd be cautious about using a backpack sprayer if you're spraying insecticides. I wouldn't do it, especially the pyrethroids. Okay, you don't want to be out there spraying something 2 foot away from a pyrethroid. Okay, the top picture there is an air blast sprayer. Now the importance of an air blast sprayer, and the reason Rick talked to you about using a backpack sprayer, is because you're trying to spray some of these diseases, especially powdery mildew. Powdery mildew shows up first on the stem, on the ground. Not the leaf, but the stem on the ground. How do you get a compound down to that stem on the ground to control that powdery mildew? You're not going to do it with a field sprayer.
Explain that a little more with air blast.
Yeah. Not going to do it with a boom sprayer. You can't get enough pressure on the boom sprayer to get that product down to the ground. Same with aphids. Aphids are underside the leaf. How do you get an insecticide down the underside of the leaf? Unless you move the leaf. That's what air blast sprayer does in the upper right-hand corner there. There's a squirrel cage fan on there. Oops. Right there. Squirrel cage fan just at the back. That's the outlet. What Kyle's pointing to is the outlet where the air comes out. Right behind that, right there, is a squirrel cage fan. It takes air, blows it out the side. You got about 50, 60 mile an hour wind right there. That moves that compound over throughout that pumpkin. It turns the leaf over, gets it down to the ground where the stem is, where the aphids are, etc. That's probably the best spray you can get for pumpkins. Air blast sprayer to move those leaves to get those products where you need them.
So there's sometimes you can use those. We have guys that use these air blasts, and they'll hit 2 or 3 or more of their rows.
You go 50 foot out.
Because remember, you got your runners out there. You're going to run over some plants, probably runners, but you're spraying 50 feet out there. That's why it's useful.
And you go both sides. You go 50 foot out this way. You go the end of the road. You go 50 foot back the opposite way. So you're getting both sides of that plant. Very effective. Most guys don't have that though. I don't have one of those. I have a boom sprayer like the lower right hand corner there, like you see an agricultural sprayer. On the boom sprayers, I look at putting as much gallonage out there, as much carrier as I can. I use 75 to 80 gallons of water per acre, which is huge. Most commercial guys would be looking at 15, like for corner beans, looking at 15 gallons an acre. I try to get as much coverage as I can by using a higher carrier rate.
Okay. You have the trouble with the air blast sprayer controlling drift, though, wouldn't you?
You have to be cautious. You can't spray in a 30 mile an hour wind. That's for sure. That's why you do.
60 mile an hour wind out there, you better be isolated if you're.
That's why you do it at dusk. So
like we were at a farm this summer, we had a program, and that grower there said he sprays about right before he goes to bed.
That's his sprayer right
there. Yeah, because of that. Yeah, and the bees.
Talk about some diseases, powdery mildew. Very easy to identify in the field. Again, you see those powdery white cotton masses on the stem and the leaf? Look on the stem first, okay? That's where you're going to see it first. So you have to scout this crop, okay? You can't plant it in June and start harvesting in October. You got to scout it during the growing season. Scout for powdery mildew. That's the most important disease to look for, okay? White splotches on the vine. And the problem with powdery mildew is it'll go on that vine until it gets to the stem. Now, how many of you guys go buy a pumpkin with no stem on it? No hands in the air here, Nathan. About down there, but there are no hands in the air here. You're not going to buy a pumpkin with no handle on it.
No, no one down here.
Powdery mildew destroys that handle. That's why you want to control it. That's why it's so important to control, okay? We talked about tolerant or resistant seed. You can get that now, okay? A couple terms I want to talk to you about. Homozygous and heterozygous. Homozygous means you have both parents contributing that tolerant gene to the offspring. So you versus heterozygous, meaning only one parent can contribute that powdery mildew tolerance to that resulting child or offspring. What do you think might be more likely to be more resistant? The homozygous is probably going to be a little more tolerant because it's got both parents contributing to that resistance. So if you can find it, look for the homozygous. Other thing about powdery mildew, most diseases need wetness, need leaf wetness to proliferate. Powdery mildew is probably the only one that does not. It grows in high humidity, okay? It doesn't need leaf wetness to sporulate, to create more disease. High humidity does it. So think about the typical July and August evenings in Illinois. This disease is going to be your biggest problem, okay? That's why we're stressing so much today. High humidity is all it takes to spread that disease. Yeah.
And if everyone plants next year, you will have that.
You're going to have it regardless.
You got a question there.
Tolerant or resistant, first of all, which is stronger, and more importantly, what does that actually mean to the grower? Does that mean that you'll have a little bit of damage, that it will get over it, that it will produce fruits? What does it actually mean?
The question is tolerant or resistant, which is better? And they're equal. There is no resistance. I put the resistance in quotes.
Okay.
It's called resistancy, but it's not resistant. It's tolerant. And the tolerant varieties give you a longer time period before you have to start spraying for it. That's all it does. It's not going to mean you're going to escape it altogether. You can still spray for it. It means you won't spray as often for it.
The plant will be able to tolerate the disease itself better than one that has no tolerance to it. But not completely, no.
Rotate fields, we talked about why before, okay? Rotate fields, again, you got to be scouting this crop. Don't walk away from it, scout it. Okay.
You said 3 years. Do you change it every year, go back after 3 years? Or you do 3 years in one spot?
Oh, the question was about rotation. You want to rotate, so you have the cucurbit crop, which includes pumpkins, gourds, squash, stuff like that, once every 3 years, minimum, in the same spot. So you want to put like corn or tomatoes or green beans or something there in those areas the other 2 years. So no more than once every 3 years we put a cucurbit crop in this location. Downy mildew can be a slight problem. I've seen it twice in the last 20 some odd years we've been growing pumpkins. It's not much of a problem. You'll see it occasionally. Here's a picture of downy mildew here. It's pretty easy to diagnose because of the features it leaves on the underside of the leaf. Okay, right. Bacterial spot is very common. You have to be concerned about it. Mohammed Babadous, Kyle mentioned earlier, is doing a lot of work. He's got graduate students on this, trying to figure out how it's spread and how to control it. At this point in time, copper sprays are probably the only thing we have. Again, you have to, that copper spray has to come in contact with the pumpkin itself in order to control it, which can be difficult when you got 3 foot of foliage between the pumpkin and your sprayer. And that's what bacterial spot looks like on the fruit itself.
Once you've seen it, you'll be able to tell. Once you've seen it once, you'll be able to tell what it is.
And it rots the pumpkin. So most of our sprays are always going to contain copper. Copper is a very cheap fungicide, so include it in most of your sprays.
Now, so that means, I think I had that on my watermelon this year, that bacterial. I don't know, the leaf, excuse me, the leaf looks familiar to that. And that would be the same, that's the same?
Yeah.
Speck. There's a bacterial speck also, so you really got to get it under a hand lens or have it identified. Yeah.
All your bacterial diseases are controlled, quote unquote, controlled with copper. So bacterial, you'll need an antibacterial product, and copper is the closest we can come to that you can get.
But you have to get to the,
It's got to come in contact with the food
with the
itself.
fruit itself.
It's a protectant. Okay, you got to apply that copper before the disease organism lands on that fruit. So it's a protectant only. Yeah.
So, as a protectant for the fruit, like, does it have to cover the entire fruit or just,
It can't. That's the problem.
yeah?
Repeat that, will you?
The question was, as using copper as a protectant, do you have to cover the entire fruit in order to protect that fruit from that bacterial disease? And yes, you do, which is very hard to do. Using a high carrier rate, again, we're trying to control diseases on the stem of the vine, for instance, or on the fruit, and you've got 3 foot of foliage to try to get through to do that. It's hard to do. Air blast sprayer works the best, but higher gallonages, higher carrier rates can somewhat mitigate that, so use higher rates as possible to try to get that product down to where you need it. Strobilurin and fungicides are used commonly in a number of crops. Pumpkins is no exception. They're very sensitive to resistance, so every pathologist is going to recommend you use strobilurin no more than once in the cycle, maybe twice if you have to, but rotate it with other fungicides to reduce instances of resistance from developing. Again, how often you spray depends upon what fungicide you're using. Okay. Here's Mohammed Babadous. Kyle was mentioning he has a cheat sheet he sends out every year of suggested spray schedules. I copied just the first part of the first page. It's 2 pages long. He'll have that again. He does it every year. He gives it the name of the compound, the rate, and the thing in the right-hand column here, this is mode of action, okay? The FREC code, the Fungicide Resistance Committee code. Each fungicide has a different code number. These strobilurins, like Quadraseer is a FREC code of 11. Cabrio is a FREC code of 11. That means they're in the same chemical family. We talked about rotations important. Use that as a guide to determine which fungicides belong to which class, and make your rotation, your fungicide rotation, based upon that. So you're not using the same FRAC code each time, okay? You don't want resistance to develop. And Mohammed I put his email address at the bottom of the page here. If you don't get to the Pumpkin School at the Special Growers Conference, he'll have this available, the 14th edition then. Email him, ask him for a copy of it, okay? Voles, 4-legged pests, voles usually not a problem with conventional tillage. They can be a problem with cover crops. Deer and raccoons sometimes problems, but usually not. Here's a vole. If you've never seen one before, this is Adams County voles. I imagine they're same in Knox County.
They're huge. They take up the whole screen.
That's a quarter there, Kyle. It's just like a mouse, except it's got a much shorter tail. And here's the problem. They make condos out of pumpkins. What they do. These pumpkins have been turned over, but you can see that upper on the right-hand corner there. That was on the ground. What Kyle's pointing to was on the ground. You can see the little trail there on the ground just to the right of that where they were. They open those up. It's a hotel for them. It's a condo. They've got all their food supply in there. They've got pumpkin seeds. They're protected from predators. They're a problem in cover crops. You see the heavy rye residue there? Those are planted in rye. That's where you're going to see these voles most commonly. All right.
Why are you planting in rye?
While we're planting in rye, and Nathan's going to cover this, I think, in the weed control option, but one thing we look at is weed control. It also keeps the pumpkins cleaner. If you're on bare soil and you get a 2-inch rain, what's your pumpkins going to look like on bare soil? They're going to be full of mud and everything. With that heavy rye residue there, they're clean as a whistle.
You cut that rye before you plant it?
We spray Roundup. You can spray Roundup, or if it's starting to flower, if it's already flowered, you can roll it and kill it. But you got to be able to crimp that stem in order to kill it. You can roll it after it starts to flower. You got to crimp that stem though when you do that, and it'll kill it too.
Nathan, are you going to cover that a little more in a bit?
Yeah, I'll talk more about that. I have some slides on that, so no, I'll get into some of the cover crop stuff.
All right.
Wrapping up here, vole control, you can use transplants instead of seeds. Zinc phosphide is a restricted use product. If you have a restricted use license, you can buy it. You can buy a 50-pound bag for about $80, and you use that in your insecticide boxes. Go to the next one. Here's the product in the lower right-hand corner there. It's just a pellet. Notice the glove. No, yeah, that's notice the glove there. Zinc phosphide is about 95% corn-based and 5% zinc phosphide. This is a restricted use product. You've got to have a license to buy it. And upper left-hand corner shows the inside of an insecticide box on a John Deere 7000 planter. You got to take out that drive mechanism for the insecticide and put another drive mechanism that you can get free from HACO, the manufacturer of zinc phosphide, to put in its place. So you don't want those pellets to crumble. You want to keep them whole to prevent vole damage, vole injury. And one thing I will tell you though, the last couple of years, we haven't been able to kill the voles with zinc phosphide. I don't know what's happened, but they eat it now and they don't die. Okay, that's not a good thing. So maybe Adams County voles are different than Knox County goats. I hope they are, because we're having less satisfactory control with them. Rick talked about this. One thing I do want to mention, this is an excellent reference. It's called Identifying and Managing Cucurbit Pests. For the Knox County group, I got 5 or 6 of these here. They're $10. You won't find a better publication of cucurbit pests than this right here. If you want them, I got them for sale. Okay, written by Rick Weinzierl, who just spoke, Mohammed Babadous, a pathologist we referenced earlier, and John Massoons. Okay.
Any of these references we're talking about, if you just Google, to make it easy, Google search Pubs Plus Illinois. That's our online catalog of anything you ever want to order from Illinois. So all of these are in Pubs Plus.
Okay, I want to invite you to the Specialty Crop Conference in Springfield on Wednesday, January 8th. There's a whole day devoted that day to pumpkin production. If you're serious about pumpkin production, go to www.specialtygrowers.org. Sign up for the pre-conference workshop on January the 8th, whole day on pumpkins, okay?
How much of that is going to be repetition from what we've got here today?
Rick's going to be on there. I'll be on there, Nathan's going to be on there, so what does that tell you?
It'll be a little more intense than what our intro is today.
3 of the probably 6 or 8 speakers you're going to hear, but there's going to be also 3 or 4 other speakers you won't hear. Plus you'll hear from 3 growers. And to me, listening to growers talk about their operations is probably the most significant part about going to that event. Any other questions before I turn over to Nathan? I've gone too long the way it is.
Thanks, Mike.